Unicorns. They used to be an endangered species, but now they're everywhere. And you can be one too.
Hi, my name's Chris, and I can't stop making things. Today I'm going to show you how to make a unicorn horn out of one sheet of craft foam, some glue, and a tiny little wheel. Start by printing out the pattern. You'll find it in the "Wow, that's a lot of horns" horn pattern bundle. Make sure when you're printing at actual size, or 100%. Otherwise your computer might try to shrink it and you'll end up with a horn that's a bit smaller than you thought it would be. Once printed, carry your pattern over to the nearest window and tape the pattern together, lining up those crosses for perfect alignment. If you don't have a window, you should probably get one. They're great. Once the pattern's taped together, you can roughly cut out the interior support funnel and then carefully cut out the unicorn horn pattern. Cut along the black line, leaving it just visible. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, you can verify that your computer didn't shrink anything by measuring the print guides. Now grab your favorite color of craft foam and lay the pattern down on it. The sheet I'm using here is 12 by 17.5 inches. Trace around the pattern, making sure to extend the alignment marks. You may already have noticed that the pattern is too big for the foam, so draw a line straight across the pattern just before it gets to the edge, and then fold back the pattern so you can trace that join mark onto the foam. Now we can trace the rest of the horn pattern on the other side of the sheet, leaving a nice big section of foam in the middle that we're going to use later. Extend those alignment marks to the inside of your tracing, and label them with the appropriate letters. I like to use a paint pen for this, because if you use something like a ballpoint pen or a Sharpie, they're always going to bleed through any light color of paint you try and paint over top of them. One of the edges gets cut at an angle, so I like to mark that on my pattern to keep me from making any tragic cutting mistakes in the future. Grab a cutting surface to protect your blue table, and take a super sharp knife and start cutting right on those lines. You can see how I'm holding the knife blade at an inward angle as I'm cutting the side that says undercut, and I'm holding it straight up and down for the other side. And that leaves us with two pieces that just need to be made into one. And we're going to make them into one using contact cement. Contact cement is not good to breathe, so make sure you have a respirator and are doing it in a well-ventilated place. I learned about using these squeeze bottles from Cosplay Apprentice. What a fantastic idea. Alright, so when using contact cement, you apply a thin layer on both surfaces, wait till it's dry so it's no longer tacky, and then press the two surfaces together. And that's how we'll make our two strips into one. Now the next and probably most important step is to find a wheel. It needs to have a rounded outside edge, and the smaller you can find the better. I found this 50mm wheel and it worked great. You can do this with a full-sized rollerblade wheel, but it doesn't turn out the best. I'll show you what I mean at the end of the video. Okay, so now we're going to start at the smaller end of the foam strip, and we're going to heat and stretch and wrap the foam around the wheel. You can see I've got my heat gun there. It's set at 650 degrees Fahrenheit. Heating the foam allows it to change its shape and follow the contours of the wheel. So my basic sort of step-by-step method here is to heat about a 5 or 6 inch section that hasn't been wrapped around the wheel yet, then wrap it around the wheel, pulling it really quite tight. Then reheat that same section now that it's on the wheel, and use my cupped hand to continue to form the foam so that it follows the shape of the wheel as much as possible. If I'm not happy with how things are looking, I just unwind it a bit off the wheel, heat it up, and try again. For your first horn, try and keep the foam strip centered on the wheel. I'll explain about how experimenting with that can change the look of your horn at the end of the video, but for now, that's a good starting point. It gets a bit tricky to keep things nice and smooth by the end, but I just do my best to form it as well as I can and try and keep as many wrinkles unwrinkled as possible. I obviously wasn't super happy with how this was going because look, I'm unwinding most of it. I then wound it up again at 726% of my normal speed and ended up with it looking like this. Wait for it to cool down and then you can unwind it and be amazed at how cool it looks. Pretty cool. Next up, it's time to glue this horn together. Apply contact cement to the edge of the foam that was the undercut edge, and then on the non-undercut side, apply glue in a couple millimeter wide strip on the front face of the foam, right along the edge there. Do this in sections starting at the tip, just because if you do the whole thing at once and some of those spirals touch each other, then you're going to end up getting them stuck together and it's going to be a huge mess and you'll be super unhappy. Once your glue is no longer tacky, you can start making your spiral from the tip down. Getting it started is the trickiest part. It's a little hard to explain, but we're aiming to get the edge of the undercut edge glued to the front surface of the non-undercut edge. At the very tip that won't be possible, they'll just have to overlap each other, but then you can see once we get a little further down, it becomes possible. Now, don't worry too much about the alignment marks. I put them on there as a basic guide, but it's pretty hard to get them to all line up. Everything is just so dependent on how the foam was wrapped around the wheel. If they end up in the general vicinity of each other, that's great. If not, well, keep on going, see how it turns out. Maybe it'll turn out great, maybe not. If not, make it again and wrap it differently the next time. Anyways, this is pretty repetitious. Just do the same things over and over again. Apply glue, wait for it to dry, spiral your horn into a spiral, mutter something to yourself about how amazing you are that you're making your own unicorn horn. Because you know what? You are amazing. Pretty soon you'll find that you've run out of horn. And we all know the old saying about that. Once you've run out of horn, it's time to eat some corn. Or a non-corn related option would be to spend some time stretching the foam at the base, just so it stands better. Nice. Okay, so at this point, you could pretty much call this done, stick it on your head and go off unicorning. But if you want to make it a little bit stronger, cut out the interior support funnel piece. Handily, it fits in the space you have left over from cutting out the horn pattern. Roll it up, making sure the tip part is super tight, and hold it super tight with a piece of tape. Then you can insert that funnel piece up into the middle of the horn, gently working it as far up as it can go. Once it's in all the way, see if you can spread the cone open a bit just by turning it sort of the opposite way than it's wound. And that gives us a horn that's a lot more solid. Mark any excess cone material and cut it off. Now you want to do some pretty intense stretching to the back part of that cone. The goal here is to stretch it enough so that it can contact the back of the horn. Kinda like that. Get a little bit of contact cement in there, let it dry, and then squeeze the sides together. And then you can go in there with your scissors and trim it nice and flush. To make it even better, we can add a base to the horn. Grab some 6 to 10 millimeter foam and trace around the horn base. Cut out the foam disc with your knife at an inward facing angle and cutting a couple millimeters towards the inside of the line you drew. Heat up your disc and form it over a round forming thing. This is so it'll fit the contours of a human head better than just a flat piece would. Then the round disc gets glued into the base of the unicorn horn. For this part, I didn't let the contact cement dry first, I just used it wet. And lastly, you want to figure out how you're going to mount your horn. You could use a piece of elastic glued onto the bottom, perhaps a headband of your daughter's that she won't let you take the ears off of, or maybe even some crazy magnet system. I have no video of that because I haven't tried it yet. Anyways, that's a unicorn horn.
All right. Checkity check, check. All right, let's talk a little bit about this method of making a unicorn horn out of craft foam. First off, if you do it right, you can get a really nice looking unicorn horn using hardly any materials, really. And it's super light, can't even tell it's on your head, it's just so light, so that's fantastic. However, because the forming relies on heating and stretching the foam, it can be really hard to get the same result every time you do it. It just super depends on exactly how much you stretch it and how much you form it and what size of wheel you're doing it on. It's kind of different from most of my patterns where if you just follow the pattern, it's gonna look the same as the one I made. This one, it's very easy to make something a little different. Of course, who said different was bad? Not me. So one of the things I found that makes the biggest effect on the shape of the horn is when you're winding it around the wheel, if the undercut side is like not centered, if it's leaning more towards the undercut side on the edge of the wheel, then you actually end up getting a horn that goes skinny to wide way faster because the undercut edge is skinnier and the other edge is wider, and so that builds up really fast. So if you're finding that your horn is either getting too big too fast or too not big too fast, then have a look at changing exactly how you line that strip up when you're wrapping it around the wheel, and that could help. Could not help too, maybe. The other thing that can be tricky is finding a wheel that's like this size. I lucked out and found a whole bunch at the thrift store, but they're not a super common size of wheel. I have seen them on Amazon as replacements for suitcase rollers. So it's possible to look at your suitcases, maybe have some small wheels on there. Obviously they're quite a bit smaller than a regular inline skate wheel. I told you I would show you how it works if you use a wheel like this. So here's a little bit of footage of that. You can see that the horn ends up being longer and narrower. It still works. And at the tip, you can see it takes a little while before you can get the angled undercut to go flush against the flat side of the previous coil. But all in all, it still is gonna work. It's just not gonna look quite as awesome. This horn is actually quite long. Once you put it on your head, it kind of looks maybe a bit on the long side, but that's okay. You can cut it off wherever you want. Also, if you want just a shorter horn, such as this, you can just use part of the pattern, basically what you can fit on one sheet of foam, and then you get that. That's a good size, actually, quite a handy size. However, this would be great for on a horse or something. If you wanted your horse to look like a unicorn, that would be perfect. Unihorse. Of course, if you want to get this unicorn horn pattern, I'll be including it in the Wow, That's a Lot of Horns pattern bundle. There's going to be way more horns than this in the pattern bundle. In fact, why don't I get some of them and show you? See? That's a pile of horns. So we got like ram horn, different shapes, dragon horns, goat horns, twisty horns. I don't know what kind of animal they're from. Twisty horned animals. Maleficent horn. Just a whole bunch of horns. Anyways, I haven't got the tutorials out for these yet, unless of course you're watching in the future, in which case I possibly have, but I will be getting those out soon. And of course, there'll be a link to the pattern in the description and maybe up here somewhere. You can find that on my website, www.lostwaxsaws.com. Okay, I think that's all my DIY unicorn horn making things to say. Thanks for watching. See ya.